Okay. You'll have to forgive me this evening. I have some notes here that I'm going to be referring to from time to time. My name is Dr. Jordan Peterson. I am a clinical psychologist and author. I wrote my doctoral thesis on the familial ties of alcoholism. I've taught at Harvard, and I am now teaching at the University of Toronto. And I really hate postmodernists. So, tonight, what am I talking about to you? It's an emerging, possibly science, possibly pseudoscience, possibly art, maybe some mashup of the three, as yet to be determined. A form of expression called ASMR. You'll have to forgive me. I was introduced to ASMR fairly recently, and I have done some digging into it, and I found it compelling enough that I should make a video out of it to go along with my many other videos on many other controversial topics, which you're welcome to check out. Or you could buy my book, and I will put links in the description. All right, so let's get started. ASMR. All right, that's the acronym, but let's give the devil its due. The official name is Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. Now that is the full scientific name. That's scientific name. That's what people are calling it. The colloquial designation, from what I can tell so far, and like I said, I've only been interested or researching this fairly recently, but you may as well call it brain tingles. But long scientific sounding words and terms sort of lend credence to an enterprise. Give it an air of legitimacy. So people tend to do that, including myself. Just listen to some of my own arguments, and you can see that precept in action. Anyway, okay, I spoke with Richard Dawkins about this a few weeks ago when I started looking into it. I spoke to him because I like to have conversations with a smart and diverse set of people, as long as, they're white males, and he was convinced that the term itself was meaningless, that the acronym, like the constituent parts of the acronym, when smushed together, didn't mean anything. So, I thought, well, wait a minute, he kind of has a point. I disagree with him about a fair number of things, but I think in this case, he was right. Man, think about it. Really, think about it. Autonomous. What does that mean? It means acting independently. Okay, so something is acting independently. What's the performant? What's the target? So far, I'm not sure. There's no clarification on that front, so move on to the next word, sensory. That means having to do with one's senses. Okay, so maybe your senses are acting independently of your control. It's reflexive, something like that. Like I said, give the devil his due. Maybe there's a little bit of seeming sense there that we can glean out of that. Next word, meridian. Okay, well, meridian means a bunch of things. But the definition that I think makes the most sense in this context is the phrase as it's used in Eastern medicine. In Eastern medicine, it's referring to the pathways leading from the brain to the organs of the body, but it's not a medical term. All right, it's not a serious scientific term. It's not recognized, not by Western medicine. It's not. I know I'm a clinical psychologist, which is a tangentially related discipline. Okay, so there are people who say meridian refers to like a central line across the brain, but they're wrong. I'm not going to provide any evidence as to why. You'd be here all night if you don't trust me about at least some things. I'll make you a deal. Okay. You give me the benefit of the doubt in some of these sort of minor aspects of the discussion, and I'll try really hard not to be condescending. Okay, champ? All right. Next word, response. Last word, response. That one's self-explanatory. Okay, we'll think about it. So maybe they're saying there are senses, and those senses are reacting independently via the meridian pathways of the body or the brain, but the pathways themselves aren't recognized, and what the response isn't even detailed in any way. The term is missing an essential component. It's a component that's it's essential to define anything. It doesn't contain the what. It makes no sense. In that case, anything could be ASMR. Getting punched in the face, which happens to my friend Ben Shapiro quite a bit, could be said to trigger an autonomous sensory meridian response, because when you get punched in the face, you have a reflexive autonomous reaction that could be said to go from the brain down to the organs, or possibly from the organs to the brain, depending on where you're punched, maybe. And you have a response. It's just the phrase is lacking this key element. It's just saying there's a response, and it's saying that the response is automatic. It's not saying what the response is, or equally as important, it's not saying what it's a response to. So when I think about it that way, it sounds like a nonsensical tenet to me. It's almost postmodernist, which, of course, I hate. I really hate it. I really do not like it, man. No. My sense is that this is a creation. This is my initial take on it, is that it's a creation of the far left. And, it probably does a fair amount of damage to our youth by sort of preventing people from growing up and facing their fears. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've seen the effects in the real world. They're especially endemic in the university system, but I've seen them in the real world too. The effects of coddling, and it's not good. It's not good. My advice would be to suspect anyone who behaves in an altruistic manner or adheres to a philosophy that espouses altruistic behavior, especially if it's a SJW, who they want to help the poor. They don't want to help the poor. They hate the rich. There's a difference between wanting to help the poor and hating the rich. Okay? I think, something in my ear. A bug in my ear. I think that when you get right down to it, anyone who claims to be altruistic, who claims to want to help you, is a socialist. And anyone who's a socialist follows the same philosophies as Mao. Mao tried to proletarize the peasantry with disastrous consequences. He had a warped interpretation of the already warped doctrine of Marxism, and that was not a great leap forward by any sense of the phrase, unless you consider killing people forward motion, in which case Mao was Speedy Gonzales. So be wary of altruism and socialism, and be very, very wary of communism, which has never accomplished anything except for the erection of tyrants. Mao killed millions of people ipso facto. If you claim you want to help someone, you are a mass murderer on a scale worse than Hitler. So stop doing it. It's that simple. Do you ever get the sense that there's like a layer of rage just hiding, like just beneath the surface? Like there's a very thin crust protecting the outside world from this river of molten, raging lava that could breach this paper-thin facade at any moment. I might erupt like a volcano in a tirade of expletives and physical violence. I get that sense about myself. And while we're on the subject, there's no direct evidence that the patriarchy exists. Okay, that is, we need to squash that immediately. There's no direct evidence that the gender pay gap exists. All right, I'm not saying there's not a pay gap, and I'm not saying it's not between genders. I'm saying that it is not a result of gender. It is due to factors other than gender, or it is due to factors inherent to gender that we cannot overcome. It's a much more complicated issue than most people understand. Of course, I'm excluding myself from that. Of course, I understand it, but you probably don't. If you disagree with me, you don't. If you agree with me, maybe you do, or maybe you just like people using big words and forceful sort of declarative statements, and you like to go along with those type of people. And look, that's part of the issue here for this sort of gender disparity. Women tend to be nicer than men. And we all know nice guys finish last, so imagine what nice women finish. Like double last. It's really bad, man. Really bad. And you might say that the obvious solution is, well, we need to take our society and we need to look at it again. We need to blank slate that puppy, and tabula rasa it, and we need a complete rethink. We want an ethical, sort of ethics first approach to a society where honesty and kindness are rewarded, and that those are the tenets that we hold dearest, that we hold high, and that we reward. That sounds dangerously socialist to me. I think instead we should all just be really mean until we get what we want, because that's the way the world really is. Just be mean, Really, seriously, don't shoot the messenger. I'm Darwin's messenger here. I feel like Thomas Henry Huxley half the time. It's quite a burden. One last bit, and don't crucify me here, but white privilege. There is no direct evidence that white privilege exists. Capitalism is the last bastion of the true meritocracy. And if a corporation doesn't hire a person of color because of their color who is best qualified for the position, then the corporation down the road is going to hire that person, and the first corporation is going to have to hire a substandard applicant, and before you know it, that first corporation is going to go out of business. That's the way it works in my head anyway, and I'm pretty sure it's right. I've spoken to a lot of white men who feel the same way, and I like to quote Dostoevsky a lot, and Dostoevsky said that it's better to go wrong in one's own way than to go right in someone else's way. So, put that in your pipe and smoke it. Now, all right, let me take a step back. Right? For every group of outrageous and ridiculous things that I say, I have to say a few sensible things. That's part of what makes me more palatable than Ben Shapiro, who's just, all right, I'm supposed to be friends with the guy, and I've tried to like the guy. And we're both, I do my best, right? Because at the end of the day, my iron's really hot at the moment, and I want to make the most of it, which means, I'm going to have to lie down with some smarmy people from time to time. So, okay, let me hit you with some actual sense here. Let's forget the terminology. Let's look at what ASMR actually is, what it actually does. Let's try to puzzle out if it's of any use or if it's, a danger to society that must be stopped at any cost, which is quite possible. So I've done some due diligence. I've been watching some of the ASMR videos on YouTube. And from what I can gather, they seem to revolve around the precept that the viewer is the center of attention, right? And it's not just any attention. There's an illusion of this attention being personally directed towards the viewer. The ASM artists, I believe that's what they call themselves, will often act as if they are talking directly to a single person in such a way that, if you can either you can be very mentally strong and invoke your suspension of disbelief, and you can turn off that sort of that barrier, and you can really feel immersed in the video, or you might be mentally ill and not be able to control the fact that that wall gets turned off, and you now have someone with a direct sort of pipeline into your brain, giving you, even if you don't have a cognitive predisposition or an illness that might cause you to do so, like, just imagine how, I'm not saying it is this way, I'm just saying just imagine the potential for how manipulative this process could be towards the mentally ill, right? I'm serious, man. It's worrisome to me on many, many levels. Broadly, as a species, we've evolved beyond this. We don't think we're at the center of everything anymore, right? We're not. The Earth is not the center of the solar system. The sun is not the center of the Milky Way galaxy. We've been forced to adjust to some sort of minimizing perspective by virtue of the scientific achievements that have come about since the days of Diogenes, and it's been a humbling experience for some more than others. It's not easy to hear you aren't important, man. It's rough. I know. Why do you think I'm on YouTube? It's partially to mitigate that sort of frightening perspective. But anyway, what I'm saying here is I worry that ASMR could be used as a crutch to fill that void of feeling, like the viewer is of no worth. It might make you feel like you have some intrinsic worth, but maybe you don't have it, right? Maybe you do, but maybe you don't. And watching a video that tells you that you do doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it right. What it does is it fosters a perception in these viewers and in their heads that has no basis in reality. And so we have ASMR making all these people feel better about themselves when they have no grounds to do so. Maybe they should feel bad about themselves. They haven't, some of them have, but by and large, they haven't gone through years of cognitive behavioral therapy or been in intense psychoanalysis for 4 times a week for a decade, and they're not taking SSRI cocktails, and they're not seeing specialists. They're watching a video of someone tapping wooden blocks together. So that just, even saying those words sounds ridiculous. And where can we take this to, right? I'm a big fan of, when I'm arguing something, sort of taking it to an extreme to illustrate a point, right? How much should we as a species accept mechanisms that allow us to deny the consequences of our actions? Do we want to pipe this stuff into prisons? Does a convicted murderer have the right to feel like everything's okay and that, they're going to be all right and everything is safe and wonderful and all that snowflake stuff? I don't think so. By the way, I don't hate women. You might notice I'm drinking smart water. because I'm very smart. It's the water's not what made me smart. I'm what made me smart, and possibly my well, this is where I get into tricky territory here, because I'm not going to say, I owe my intelligence and my current status to a roll of the dice, and where I happen to be born, where I happen to grow up. I don't like those kind of identity politics. That's one of the things I rally against a lot. The point, it makes me sick to listen to it. So anyway, let's move on. Let's ask this question. Okay, why do we as a society need more balms? Right? More ointments, more salves. What is wrong with us that we can't stand up to the rigors of modern life? By almost any criteria you choose to look at it through, whatever lens you choose, we have it pretty easy right now, compared with any other moment in history. If you live in the Western world right now, you're doing okay, man. You're okay. People complain about power hierarchies, exploitation of the masses, the oppressor and the oppressed, suppression of minorities, suppression of women. But it's still better now than it is in any other time. And most of us are going to exist for some length of time beyond the now. And hopefully during that interval, things will get even better. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes we step backwards. I'm not going to go into any possible areas where we might be moving backwards right now or have moved backwards recently. I don't want to open that can of worms, and I'm Canadian anyway. So, I've got no dog in the fight. But if I did, I'm not even, forget it. Okay, so there's a claim that ASMR helps people sleep, and I think this is, probably more credible and possibly even laudable. Sleep is super, super important, man. It's important to sleep. It's important to be sure you get out of your bed at a reasonable hour. Going to sleep at a sort of preset time and getting out of bed at a preset time, that's very useful. It's useful for your brain to get into a rhythm. It's useful for your windows of productivity, constantly throwing curveballs at yourself when you don't need to. Why handicap yourself like that if it's not necessary? And it's not. So, if it helps you sleep, great. I would like to see more studies on it. I'd also like to get it a name that actually describes it in some way, but one step at a time. These studies, when you're in a clinical setting, I'm a clinical psychologist. When you're running an experiment, you don't want your statistical analysis to be univariate. You want it to be bivariate or ideally just multivariate, so you can really zero in on the things, not only the things that are causative, but how those causative elements, those different causative elements, how they relate to each other. So ideally, I would like to see, large numbers of multivariate studies within and across people who watch ASMR. I want to know, I want to isolate variables, frequency, type of video, session lengths, things like that. The other day I was watching one of these videos, I fell asleep, but then 20 minutes later, I woke up. I was woken up by the same video. The very thing that was supposed to help me sleep, helped me sleep. It giveth, and then it tooketh away, woke me up. So how does that work? Like, how do we fix that? What's going on there? It sounds nutso to me. So what are you supposed to do? Like, once you fall asleep, you have this person speaking to you. Does it just end? Does your device turn off? What if there's an advertisement at the end, right? Do you have YouTube Red? I recommend YouTube Red for everybody because I get more revenue that way. So you get YouTube Red. You can autoplay videos, and you don't have to worry about demonetized videos, which especially my videos, they get demonetized systemically because I'm telling truths that people don't want to hear, especially people on the far left. And I would include, obviously, YouTube and their parent company, Google, among those. There's a lot of unanswered questions, But I do want to say, though, I did like the person, the video I was watching was a video by someone named Creative Calm, ASMR. She was very good. She woke me up, but, she's still good. I'm Canadian, she's Brit. We share a common queen, so, we're simpatico. She still woke me up, though. But regardless, she's okay in my book. And again, so speaking of books, my book, 12 Rules of Life, sold a lot of copies. A lot of people are interested in what I have to say. I'm a fascinating person, and I'm a comparatively easy pill to swallow. So please buy it. I'll put a link somewhere. I feel like I'm all over the place here. There's a lot to cover. So if you could let me collect my thoughts just for a moment. A little more smart water. Seeing how the cameras do. I do all my own camera work. Is that impressive? I don't know if it is or not. Probably not. Okay, so when I think back on the stream of consciousness sort of speaking that I've been doing here, although it's been, I have these sort of guide rails by this sort of outline that I have in front of me. I'm still trying to organize my thoughts and wrapping my head around sort of a few key issues. The first is intent, right? So is the intent of ASMR healthy, unhealthy, or neutral, which could be considered healthy as long as the intent is fulfilled? So first thing, what is the intent? Second thing, does it fulfill its intent? If we discover benevolent intent, but the procedure doesn't work, that's a massive point of failure. Although, of course, the answer to that question is rarely a simple yes or no. There's all kinds of factors that get measured in there. It's not black and white. So that's the second thing. And then the third, the final thing is, what's the cost? Because even if we conclude the intent is benign and that it does indeed work for a percentage of people, we still need to evaluate the cost and ultimately determine if it's worth it. Everything has a cost. Okay, there's no free lunch, man. I know socialists, they would like you to think there is, but there isn't. So why don't we focus on item 1, the intent of ASMR. Because we should start there, because if we conclude that the intent is destructive or non-productive or whatever, then there's no point in continuing, right? So let's hit that first. We want it to succeed. It needs to succeed in a way that we want to indulge. So there are a lot of schools of thought on this. One is that ASMR is meant to focus your mind, to help you study, that type of thing. One is that it's meant to help you sleep. So we've talked about unintentionally also wake you up. It's meant to ease anxiety, to quiet your mind. There is a subgenre of ASMR that is sexualized. And I've watched a lot of these videos, like I said. And look, I don't let my friends nibble on my ear, I just don't. That's a privilege reserved for my wife. There's a sexual component there. I keep my ears very clean for that express purpose. There's a little hair growing in there now over the last few years. She says she likes it. No way of knowing the truth there. And I probably don't want to probe too deeply. Some layer of abstraction between partners is probably a good thing. But let me give a quick message here to people who say that they can spend an hour licking and kissing your ear in a video and then turn around and say, well, there's no sexual component to that. Pull your head out of your ass. Face a truth. It might be an unpleasant truth for you. You might not want to hear it. Honestly, if your head is that far up your ass, I don't want you licking my ear in the first place. But the bottom line is you are providing service, and people, you know that people will find it sexual. So it's not even a blurred line. It's nibbling and kissing an ear. That's textbook sexual behavior, man. Now, I'm not judging that. Surprisingly, I do judge most things. In this case, I'm not saying the act is empirically wrong or immoral. I don't find that to be immoral or wrong. Different strokes for different folks. I'm just saying don't kid yourself. Acknowledge it. Own it. So I'm going to kind of go out on a limb here and say that we can group all these intents, even to some extent, the sexualized intent, into one single group. And that is the intent of ASMR is to make you feel a connection with and feel the existence of another person, therefore ridding you of some of the existential dread that is part and parcel with being alone. Now that connection can have 1,000 interpretations and 1,000 ramifications. The connection can comfort you. It can stop the wheels in your head from spinning, especially if you have obsessive or compulsive tendencies. It's white noise for your brain to chill out to, which doesn't mean it needs to be words. It doesn't need to be spoken. It can be ritualistic. Sounds, as long as it's not an aggressive sound, this is something that is deeply seated in our evolution. So imagine Australopithecus afarensis, it was an early primate. It was around for almost 1 million years, way longer than Homo sapiens has been around. Imagine them, grooming each other. You're in a tree or a cave. The fossil record is sort of unclear as far as A. afarensis goes, how they lived, but they were tribal. They were a group sort of primate, but they're diurnal. They sleep at night. They were smart enough to know that there is a vulnerability associated with that period of sleep. They couldn't see that well in the dark. They were a lot stronger than us, but they were still only about 4.5 feet tall. They couldn't see in the dark, and they're apex predators out there, man. Talking, the king cats, the reptiles, crocodiles, creatures that were much more attuned to nocturnal hunting and could make quick work of Australopithecus afarensis. But they were smart enough to engage in tribal behavior, and they knew that, you're safer in numbers. The presence of another one of your own species, this is broadly speaking here, was generally preferable to being alone. Unless that other member were homicidal, which, some of them were. We like to blame all the ills of modern life on modern culture, but that's fallacy. If that were true, there wouldn't be all these records of rape and murder amongst almost all types of all intelligent animals. Cruelty seems to be built in to the brain at the sort of R complex level, the very base, right there near the stem. Hard to get away from. And apes, some of the apes are brutal creatures, man. So anyway, murder aside, the sounds made by others, like I said, it didn't have to be voices. It didn't have to be guttural sounds. It could be the sounds of breathing, or it could be the sounds of, just sounds created during the course of routine life. Tending a fire. Australopithecus afarensis didn't tame fire, but, their smarter cousins did. The sounds of tending a fire. These sounds would be reassuring. And not just because there's safety in numbers, but also because if you encounter complete silence, it begs the question, why did everything just shut up completely? Like what does everybody else here sense that I don't sense? Complete silence is very unnerving. And that there's an evolutionary cause to that. So that's my posture. The intent of ASMR is to make you feel less alone. Okay? All right, the second part of the question has a simple answer. We only have anecdotal evidence suggesting that ASMR works because the studies don't exist yet. And I'm not saying it doesn't work. There was a time when we only had anecdotal evidence that the Earth was a sphere. It might be, you may listen to and watch ASMR all the time. It may be patently obvious to you that it works, right? But it doesn't matter. You can't confuse your personal experience with any kind of statistically significant data set. So we need that data. From what I've read, we're in the process of getting it, but we need it quick. Maybe it's not so urgent, but if you want to answer the question, you need the data. So if you forced my hand, and you'd have to force it pretty hard because I don't like to speak to things that haven't already been settled in the lab. I'd guess that ASMR does work, does accomplish its intent somewhat for some people some of the time. There may be genetic or cultural predispositions that speak to its effectiveness. I don't know. But for our purposes here, let's just say there's some validity to its efficacy, and we just don't know the degree. Once we get the data, and then we'll know the degree. So now we get to the big one, the cost. What is the cost of listening to hours and hours of ASMR? Autonomous sensory meridian response. What's the cost to you? What is the cost to your personal growth? What is the cost to your mental health, your fortitude? It would be very easy for me to say, don't listen to this twaddle. Listen to my videos. Listen to Solzhenitsyn. Listen to Dostoevsky. Listen to Jung. Let something of empirical, intellectual value seep into your noggin while you're nodding off to sleep. Obviously, that wouldn't work so well if you were using it as a study aid. It'd be distracting, engaging the same side of the brain for two separate tasks. It's very difficult, although I can do it. I think it's a facile way of looking at the problem because the bottom line is you can't spend that much time centered on learning. The mind needs as much time to recuperate from strenuous intellectual activity as your muscles do. Information needs to be dwelled upon. It needs to be gone over and stored differently, moved from the frontal to the occipital areas and shifted around. When it comes right down to, the question that we sort of started here, we're saying that ASMR is largely successful in its intent. Maybe it is effective, or it is somewhat effective, although its exact amount is not yet known. And the cost is a complicated question that we can't. I like to, when there's a complicated question, I like to say yes and no, because when you say yes and no, you can't be wrong, right? And there's certainly value in making sure that you're open and when you're talking about something and thinking about something, sort of working through it in your head as you sort of turn it over. But so we have these three factors, and I think the best thing to do in this case is to flip a coin. Say, is ASMR on the whole of value? I think we should flip a coin. Believe it or not, I make a lot of my life's decisions this way. I'm not a determinist, but I'm also not a determinist. So what I'm doing here is I feel like I'm giving Schrodinger's cat a way to express itself via this coin here. And I'm going to let the universe sort of guide us all. Okay, here we go. heads. Sorry. Okay, so heads means it's great. Tails means it's not. Okay, let me do it again. Heads again. Okay, so it's great. That means I have to say that I like it. All right. Let me think about that for a minute. All right. ASMR is an emerging art form with some scientific trappings, but it's largely art, and like any other art form, nascent art form, there's going to be a lot of blind alleys that are gone down, cul-de-sacs. There's a lot of feeling out and then doubling back, as it spreads its tingly tentacles across the globe. I think there is a potential for abuse. Almost anything can be abused. And yet, it feels to me like the enterprise on the whole is not nefarious. I mean, if anything, it's a little stumbly, maybe. It hasn't found its footing yet. I will say I feel very strongly that, like any other art form, it needs to innovate or die. We can't have the same video put out, using slightly different wooden blocks, slightly different brushes 100 times by 100 different artists over and over again. What happens there is you run up against the wall of market saturation. You lose people. There's an interesting point of view where people can think that competition is unhealthy because it's taking people away from them. But if you look at the larger picture, what you're making sure is that when you're competing within a certain realm, and keeping the person in that realm and interested in that realm is far more important than keeping them with you. So if people get bored with ASMR because ASMR content is boring, then they're just going to stop listening to ASMR, writ large. It's just going to be the end of it for that person. Going to lose all the momentum. So I guess my message to all the artists in this genre would be keep pushing it. Do weird stuff. Do things that are different. Keep failing. Do things that embarrass you. Do things that satisfy you. Do things that speak to you. Ignore what anyone else says, except for me. Listen to everything that I say. Everything that I say is gospel. That's just the way it is. I'm a clinical psychologist. So that's it. All right. We're good? Okay. All right, what do I have up next?